Beta testing is now underway, so over the last few days, I've been testing the Brewmaster Monk, and I have a lot I want to discuss. But after writing down all my thoughts, I decided to actually break this into two separate videos. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons the rework has, and how the testing is essentially gone thus far. And then in a separate video, I'm going to do like a deep dive into the hero talents and my thoughts on those. But without further ado, let's dive in. Outside of the stability issues on the first day or so, testing has been great so far, though we are limited on the level of content we can do. So as of right now, only heroic dungeons and I guess normal dungeons are available, and while we are scaled, we still have access to things like tier sets as well as raid items, so it's essentially just been a breeze. So with that being said, it's pretty difficult to test a lot of elements of the Brewmaster Monk due to how Stagger interacts with the class design and its philosophy. Because of this, it's near impossible to actually test the limits of things like Nizao, Stagger Purification, and related talents like Dragonfire Brew and Guy Plin's Imperial Brew, and new talents like Ox Dance and its accompanying capstones. There are a lot of things we're going to actually need to wait until Raid or Mythic Plus testing, but I do want to talk about some of the things that we can test. So let's start with the tier set. The Monk's Gatecrasher Tier 1 set bonus for the War Within actually has to be one of the best tank tier sets out of the bunch. I also think it looks great. But let's start with the 2 set bonus. This reads Blackout Kick and Keg Smash deal 20% additional damage, and Shuffle also grants a 3% damage reduction. While the tier 1 sets are normally like pretty standard and boring, this is a little above par. Not only are we getting a flat 3% damage reduction essentially from just being in combat, we're also getting a massive damage increase on our 2 favorite abilities. Before I get into everything, let's move on to the 4 set, and it reads Blackout Kick increases your damage dealt by 1% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3, and has a chance to reset the cooldown of Keg Smash and make it cost no energy. While this part sounds pretty underwhelming, a flat 3% damage increase on top of our 2 set bonus is actually nothing to scoff at. On top of that, we're also getting a damage bonus that interacts with our class. Free Keg Smashes and a no energy cost has some unique interactions. Obviously, I wanted to know how frequent this proc though is on the free resets, and through my testing, it seems that on average it's every 3 to 4 blackout kicks, but it's possible to have them actually like back to back, which feels very good when you're like Keg Smash Blackout, Keg Smash Blackout. Overall, this set is pretty interesting because it actually favors one of the 2 hero talents and a regular talent that I don't think a lot of people think about. The Shado-pan tree actually favors Keg Smash damage, and the tree alone actually increases it by 30%. With free resets and amplified damage, Keg Smash is actually going to start hitting like a truck again. This paired with our classic Storm Stout's Last Keg will provide even more damage, and if players opt to drop Salsabim's Strength for Scalding Brew, your Keg Smash is going to start dealing roughly like 35 to 40% of your overall damage, at least in AoE. The concern with this challenger is actually the uptime on Breath of Fire, but things like Charred Passions can actually remedy this with well-executed spinning crane kicks. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Shado-pan though, because I'm going to do like a full deep dive video in the near future on it. Regardless, this tier set offers bonus damage on our 2 main abilities by a large amount, and a flat 3% damage reduction whenever Shuffle is up. And along with this, we're also getting free Keg Smashes that reset roughly every like 12 to 15 seconds. Not to mention the other flat 3% damage increase to all of our abilities, as long as we're using Blackout Kick regularly, which you should be. I'm very happy with this tier, and it's definitely a good sign moving into the expansion. Alright, moving on to my experience testing so far, I'm going to mostly be focusing strictly on how the class plays and the core talents, along with, of course, bugs and issues with the class. First, I want to say that Brewmaster feels very good right now. With the slight reduction to active abilities, or in other terms, the button bloat, I believe the barrier to entry for this is much lower. For players who are looking to make a return to the class or even pick it up for the first time, there are less buttons you need to worry about, like Summon White Tiger Statue and Chi Wave. White Tiger Statue has been made a Windwalker exclusive, and Chi Wave was turned into a passive ability. These 2 changes are enough to make it feel like the class is just more simple. Additionally, with added hero talents like Overwhelming Force and Master of Harmony tree, you can technically actually just drop spinning crane kicks since it loses almost all functionality, in a good way. Outside of the rotation, there are some other cool changes that were made. Talents like Flow of Chi, Bounce Back, and Elixir of Determination. This tends to remove like the one-shot threats that Brewmasters typically face in Mythic Plus content. As previously mentioned, we've only been able to test heroic dungeons, but regardless, there are now additional safety nets for players. Other cool perks of the talents, and by far one of my favorite additions of the bunch, is our class capstone, Lighter Than Air. First, the mobility increase is very, very fun. Being able to dash after rolling has added a new element to the class, and one that I didn't expect to enjoy. It's pretty dynamic as well, meaning like you can roll in one direction and then jump in another, and then dash back in another direction. On top of that, you can actually now negate fall damage with a well-executed roll into a double jump, or I guess like in this case, like a dash. And something else I found was the ability to walk on water. I really don't know if this is a bug or not, but for the duration of 5 seconds of the buff, you can actually walk on water, which is just super great. Useful? Not really, but it's like super convenient. All right, let's talk about the more serious stuff. Most of these concerns will relate to scaling issues, negatives on the talent rework, or just like general bugs that I've found and experienced so far through testing. I don't want this to come across as like negative, but instead as like feedback for the class in its current state. First, as some of you may already know, stagger scaling is kind of in the dump. My current item level on beta is 614, which is comparable to basic heroic. Not like upgraded heroic, but like basic heroic gear, which drops at like 2 of 6 upgrade track, which is 613. So I'm like somewhere in that realm of like early heroic gear. My stagger while out of combat is 16%. Shuffle will actually knock this up to 39 though, but this is lower than we had at the start of Dragonflight, which was closer to like 45 to 50. You can remedy this a little bit by putting 2 points into high tolerance, but instead of granting its promised 2 points per stack or 2% per stack, it's only granting about 1.5% stagger. I'm not sure if it's a bug, because once we have shuffle, we're going to be closer to about 19% stagger, and then in combat we're about 43.5, 44%. While this is a little better, it's still a pretty rough 2-point node that still exists in our talent tree, which detracts from our ability to take either the new talents, the reworked talents, or the capstones. This is a cause for concern, and I hear a lot of players saying it's a bug with stagger scaling. And while I'd like to agree, Blizzard did provide us with a lot of additional damage reduction passive nodes like Bounce Back and Flow of Chi and Elixir of Determination that I mentioned earlier, alongside with additional defensive nodes inside of the hero talent tree. Sadly, I hate my rationale because I think it's essentially buffs accompanied by nerfs. And while this could feel bad, I think the more I think about it, I'm not sure if it's necessarily a bad thing. Brewmaster stagger scaling has pretty much been the bane of the class's existence. Like, lower stagger value means that the class just dies, even just being looked at by mobs, versus the immortal gods that we are with high stagger. With a more consistent stagger range, or I guess value in this sense, with a heavy emphasis on passive damage reductions, shifts the balancing to that instead of being like actual stagger to the actual defensive buffs. Maybe it's copium or a little hopium, I'm not really sure, but I'm not stressing about stagger value currently until we can start testing it in Mythic Plus. But part of me doesn't mind the idea of having less of an emphasis on early game stagger values when our tier set is very strong and our talents provide us with more defensive value. With that out of the way, I do want to kind of quickly address Celestial Brew healing, because there seems to be a little bit of an imbalance in our health pool with how much Celestial Brew actually heals or absorbs for, but I'm hoping that's already noted by Blizzard. I'm not sure if it's bugged from when either like Blizzard combined our Celestial Brew talent and the improved node, or if it was like the increase of player health or our secondary stat scaling in like regards of like mastery. But basically, a baseline Celestial Brew is only giving like a 12 to 15% max health absorb, and a full 10 stack Purified Chi is like only 35 to 40%, which feels very rough, especially when it's very infrequent to even break out a green stagger. I'm going to probably address this more if it doesn't get fixed when I can start testing Mythic Plus, but I do want to note it, that Celestial Brew's healing is just like in the dump. Moving on from my limited testing with Oxstance, it does appear that it's pre-stagger, which is a good thing, but our stagger value is like already extremely low, so it doesn't really matter. And like the talent, it doesn't say that it would do this, but it doesn't increase our stagger for a short period of time. It just like staggers that initial hit that did anywhere between 50 to 60% of your max health in a single blow. Because of the low end level of content we have access to, I didn't like plan on testing this talent at all, but I did try to hit some training dummies with it. There is a potential as a defensive talent in Mythic Plus, but I can't test it until we have Mythic Plus. I just wanted to note it here, but I really don't have any accurate information on how this talent will interact with the survivability of the Brewmaster. Lastly, I wrote this stuff down, but I don't think I'll talk about it here. I did want to briefly talk about the power level of our capstones in the current state, but I think it's gonna have to wait until a future video, because realistically, I can't accurately test 3 of our 4 capstones. Chi Surge is like fine, it gives us cooldown reduction, it gives us a little bit of damage whenever we use Weapons of Order, and it pairs well with like the cooldown reduction we're going to get from Shado-pan if you end up playing it. But the other 3 talents are based around, you know, our stagger level, and because of the easiness, or I guess because of the difficulty level of our current content, it's just hard to test because we're not in deep stagger, therefore we're not going to be getting a lot of value out of these. Anyways, let's recap everything. So what are my overall thoughts? I think the class feels great, and I'm excited the direction it's moving in, and I'm also excited to continuously test this class throughout the rest of beta, especially once Mythic Plus becomes available. The class tree is phenomenal, but the new Spec tree has some glaring issues with the different testing limitations, but again, only time will tell. I will be doing a video shortly about each of the hero talent trees with like a little bit more of an in-depth look, so keep an eye out for that. Let me know your thoughts down below though, and a massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters because without them, I wouldn't be making videos like this. Anyways, I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.